It's been a really exciting year of Intel and AMD battles, and now we're doing a recap of all the CPUs we've tested. There wasn't one in the box, don't worry, for the past year to just look at how it's gone and which ones are the best to buy for different scenarios, like gaming, best budget CPU, best really cheap CPU, while still being usable, that is, and a couple of other aspects like most efficient. So this is going to be a good one. All the links to the CPUs are in the description below. It's meant to serve as a quick access guide to make it easy for you to pull the trigger on something so you don't have to dig through a dozen of our reviews from just the past year alone to make your decision on what to buy. We'll also be looking at some of the still in the market, but technically old CPUs like Ryzen 5000 and Intel 12000, because some of those are really good deals right now. And we'll get to see who wins the GN Award Crystal for Best Overall. Let's get started. We brought you this video. You can currently get 10% off of store.gamersnexus.net with code THANKSSTEVE.
Thanks, Steve.
At checkout. This video is a condensed version of a year of in-depth CPU reviews made possible by all the support from our subscribers. So thanks, subscribers. To help fund another year of in-depth testing, grab something on the store and get a quality product in return. We just restocked our wildly popular blue and black wireframe mouse mats, which give a desk-sized mousing surface with detailed 3D wireframes of CPU coolers, motherboards, RAM, and more. We go the extra mile with our mats by using a custom blue rubber underside to match the blue anti-fray stitching at the borders, ensuring a durable mat with a vibrant color pop. Alternatively, refresh your setup with a new black and red HUD mouse mat, made with the same high-quality materials except with bright, custom red rubber underside and stitching. Head over to store.gamersnexus.net to support our work in 2023 and refresh your setup today. Okay, so this video, we're going to be looking at a lot of CPUs. We'll be looking at the 12,000 series, the 5,000 series, 7,000 series AMD CPUs, 13,000 series Intel CPUs, because there's a lot to talk about, and each of them has sort of a different place it can be useful. To set expectations for this video, in these best of roundups we make every year, we try to make them as accessible as possible, so people who have been sort of out of the industry for, say, 3 years while they've been running their system, they can come back in, watch one of these videos, and just instantly get caught back up to speed and figure out what to buy. So for these, we don't pack them full of as many charts as we normally do. If you want all of that, or if you see a CPU in this list that really interests you, you can get all of the pros and cons to it by checking out the review we did of that CPU, and we'll link each of those in the description below, alongside the links to the CPUs on Amazon or wherever they are that we find them. So for more depth, just click on one of the links to one of our reviews previously. Otherwise, this will get you the CPUs you can still buy today, at least as of filming, and help you figure out which ones to choose. Now, if you have been out of PC building for a little while, now is a fantastic time to build, because the AMD Ryzen 7000 series CPUs just launched. Intel's 13,000 series CPUs also just launched recently. There's new GPUs. There's a lot going on and plenty of options in the market, including older stuff that's getting purged at lower prices. As we finished the main part of this script that you're about to watch and started working on producing the video, AMD instituted a temporary price drop on its Ryzen 7000 series CPUs. That's meant to be a Black Friday special type of thing. That will influence some of the stuff we're saying in here, because the prices are moving around a little bit right now. So everything we said in the video you're about to watch is based on the normal prices that they've been since they launched. However, for the next, we don't know how long, maybe week, maybe a couple weeks, it looks like AMD has dropped some things like the 7600X as far down as $250, which makes them instantly more interesting. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how it's impacted things in the conclusion at the end. But let's get to the core part of this and talk about some of the performance numbers overall. Our first award for the year goes to Best Overall CPU. We're giving this to the Intel Core i5 13600K. Best overall isn't just about being straight up the best. That ended up being basically the new category for most expensive CPU. Instead, best overall has to be not only good, but good at the price point. And it also has to be good at more than just one thing. It's a combination of value, gaming performance, production performance, and power efficiency, and everything else, like thermal management. The Intel i5 13600K ends up being a strong balance of all of those things. Its relative power efficiency is one of them that it's good at, especially compared to the i9 13900K. It's also competitive in a wide variety of games and everyday applications. For gaming, the 13600K, just as an example, gets 87% of the performance of a 13900K in CSGO, while being also about 50% of the price of the 13900K. In other games, we see similar scaling. You get most of the performance of a $660 13900K, except for $300. Not to mention the lower cooler cost requirement for a 13600K, the lower end motherboard you could get away with, all of these things that add up and further reduce the barrier to entry. In non-gaming applications, like say Blender cycles rendering on the CPU, the 13600K is competitive with last generation's i7 12700K. It punches above its price class when compared to last year, helping build on its positioning as a well-rounded CPU at a good price. AMD won this category for 4 years running with the AMD R5 CPUs, starting with the R5 1600 originally. Last year, it lost this category to the Intel i5 12600K. Intel has managed to hold on for another year here, giving AMD and its R5 7600X something to think about, namely the price. The 7600X could have taken this spot, but it's at least $50 too expensive for what it accomplishes when compared to the competition. After seeing just how many last-gen CPUs are still available today, and given the age and prevalence of the AM4 platform, we added a new category for this year, and we took one of the old ones out. This one is best upgrade value. This is for users who might be trying to bring an older platform forward. For this, the AMD R7 5700X wins. We looked into Intel, but the limitation to a typical life cycle of just 2 CPU generations knocked it out of the running pretty fast. The AMD R7 5700X is currently just under $200 on Amazon, at least when we wrote this. The 5800X is $235, but the 5700X is most of what the 5800X is. It's just cheaper. Our review of the 5700X earlier this year was published stating that much, where we said it's what the 5800X should have been. At $200, this undercuts the cheapest Ryzen 7000 CPU by $100, while also offering a higher core count. It's useful in some non-gaming applications mostly, but obviously core count isn't everything. One of the advantages, though, is it also gives owners of older AMD platforms, which is most owners of AMD platforms right now, a clear and affordable upgrade pathway without necessitating too much reinvestment into the now abandoned AM4. In our original review of the 5700X, we published some of the charts you're seeing now. In gaming, it was often within an unnoticeable range of the 5800X. We saw gaps no greater than a few FPS on average in most charts. It outperforms the budget King i3 12100F by enough to make the 5700X worth considering. And in some games, like Rainbow Six Siege, it even kept up with the 12900K, just depending on the game. While the 5700X is on a platform that won't get further updates, we think it makes a great case for an upgrade. You won't need a new motherboard, you won't need new RAM, you can probably even keep the cooler. This is one of the cheapest ways to get a PC upgrade project on AM4 while still getting a meaningful uplift if you're on something like Ryzen 1000, 2000, or 3000. Not to mention the reduction in unnecessary e-waste since you can reuse the whole computer. The honorable mention here is the AMD Ryzen 7 5800X 3D. This has become rarer, which is the only reason it's not the primary recommendation here because it is harder to find now. It's still sometimes available though. At the time of writing, we found a couple online, new in box, for $360. It's not bad. We especially liked it at the $330 to $340 price point held up until recently, but because it remains one of the best gaming CPUs and even outperforms Ryzen 7000 series in most games, it has become harder to find, expectedly. The next award is for the most efficient CPU, and we're giving this one to the 7950X in Eco Mode. The AMD R9 7950X isn't particularly efficient out of the box. It made us truly appreciate the AMD R9 5950X, which was far and away the most efficient out-of-box CPU we've ever reviewed. But there's a mode in BIOS called Eco Mode, and it's easy. You can just toggle it with a switch to enable it. We talked about how it works in our Eco Mode benchmarks that we've linked below if you're curious. In the Eco Mode benchmarks we ran, the 750X launched itself ahead of the 5950X for efficiency. The 65 watt Eco Mode wasn't worth it overall for the performance trade-off, we think anyway, but the 105 watt mode still significantly outperformed the baseline efficiency of the 7950X stock, while maintaining nearly all of the performance, especially in gaming. Gaming doesn't load the cores as hard, so there's not that much sacrifice. Even in production benchmarks where it was all core, we saw the vast majority of performance sustained in 105-watt eco mode. Although it normally feels bad to intentionally slow down a product out of the box, in the case of the 7950X, you're really not losing that much speed. AMD pushed it to its absolute limit to try and get that last 1 to 2%. It's kind of like opposite overclocking. It used to be that it was your job to get the last 1 to 2%. But here, they were doing it to try and outrank Intel in sort of a last-ditch attempt. In some cases, we saw larger trade-offs, like 6 to 9% in really heavily thread-bound workloads, but those were relegated to those production benchmarks. Unfortunately, this also pushes it past diminishing returns with the way it was running out of the box on the efficiency curve and just results in unnecessary power consumption and heat. 105-watt eco mode should be seriously considered by anyone using this CPU. The only time you should completely ignore it is if you need absolutely every ounce of speed out of the CPU. For example, if you're running some sort of render operation where you're more limited by processing speed than you are by human speed. That's often the case for us when we really need to get a video out fast on some kind of news, so we wouldn't trade off there. But it just depends on your use case. AMD did well on efficiency with eco mode, and we'd like to see a tune to 7950X one day, maybe something like a 7950E. That ships with a lower TDP by default. Watch our previous eco mode tests to learn more about this feature. Next up is the award for Best Gaming CPU. This one goes to the Intel i9 13900K, and it's a simple category. We're only considering the literal best, ignoring price and value entirely, and also it does have to be available. So, for this one, the frame snobs in the audience will be happy. That'd be the people who aren't willing to give up even, say, 5 FPS out of 600, because the 13900K does allow you to get pretty much everything that you can. This one is numbers-based. Let's look at some quick charts. In Final Fantasy XIV, the 13900K held a strong lead over the best overall winner, the 13600K, at 14% ahead. Now, that's for over double the money, but if you're the type who wants just the best, this would technically be it. 635 FPS average wouldn't be anything to really complain about here. It's only 5% ahead of the 13600K due to hitting a GPU bottleneck, but if you were to run, say, a 4090 or similar, the scaling room will increase. In Cyberpunk, we did use a 4090 for testing. The 13900K ran at 263 FPS average, leading the 13600K by 9%. It also led the 7950X by 15%. CSGO, that's different though. It was the only game we tested where technically the 13900K didn't chart top and the 7950X did instead. If you're looking for the overall best gaming CPU, the 13900K is it this year. It's also a good overclocker for anyone interested in competitive OC or just pulling even more performance out of the top-end CPU, but you are going to need really high-end cooling if you start overclocking it. You're more likely to be bottlenecked by the GPU than anything else with this CPU, so it'd be worth considering a 4090. The next award is for the best budget CPU of 2022. This one goes to the Intel i3 12100F. Although it's technically one generation old, until Intel refreshes with the, say, 13100, the 12100F remains a budget champion for the amount of performance at the cost. The CPU is $100 right now. An alternative might be the older 10100F or 10105F, both of which are about $70 to $80 today. But the $100 12100F is a little faster and newer, and for buyers not on the absolute strictest budget, we think it's generally worth it. The 12100F is a 4-core part with 8 total threads. All the cores on the CPU are performance cores, so it runs 0 of the new efficient cores. Frequencies have it at 3.3 GHz base and a very simple 4.3 GHz boost without any secondary boosting technologies. This is a straightforward CPU in how it operates. Power consumption is also low enough that a stock or a free cooler would be enough to keep it under control, helping reduce the entry cost to your system. The 12100F runs on DDR4, DDR5 also, and previously we ran D4 versus D5 tests on the 12900K, and we found few differences at the time. For the 12100F, this would be even truer. It's just not high-end enough to extract the value out of DDR5. You can just go with DDR4 for this one and save some money. Gaming performance allows the 12100F to get good enough frame rate that it'll last for several years without pulling you into unplayable territory for most games. It's possible that some extremely thread-bound games challenge it at some point, or certainly time-based processing like AI turns in some games, but for the stuff we test, it's more than good enough. We're at over 100 FPS average in a lot of scenarios, and while that doesn't come close to what higher-end options produce, relatively speaking, in an absolute sense, we have to keep perspective that most gaming experiences feel pretty good even at 60 FPS. That's especially true if you're trying to spend $100 on a CPU that gets double that frame rate anyway. This category is for best high-end desktop CPU. Unfortunately, it's no contest. There's no winner here.
And wow, it has been fun.
Intel and AMD decided not to fight in this arena anymore. You can buy a 7950X for an i9 3900K, yes, but you're not getting the PCIe lane count benefit or the massive I/O benefit or things like dual 10 gigabit NICs that would be offered by an Intel 10980XE type replacement CPU or an AMD Threadripper CPU. Even though the 7950X and the 13900K are high-end and we use these types of CPUs in our own workstations now, they're lacking in other areas that make HEDT CPUs exciting. Technically, AMD has Threadripper Pro CPUs available, and they did come out this year, but they haven't been updated for a while now. They originally launched only for OEM systems, and we're also relegated to the higher-end 8-channel version of that CPU. Without a true Threadripper non-Pro successor, this category has shifted into a higher still price bracket that's using features that most people don't need to pump the price even higher still. For something with just a high lane count and lots of I/O, we need a Zen 4 Threadripper non-Pro CPU, or maybe Intel can return with X799 or something. If you really need a high thread count, you could explore the Threadripper Pro 5975X or its similar CPUs, but we already know there are Zen 4 Threadripper CPUs, at least non-Pro as we know it now, on the horizon. So it'd feel kind of bad to invest the significant amount of money with a similarly expensive, higher performing option, in theory, just around the corner. Finally, on the good and cheap side of things, we're looking at the cheapest CPU that can still make sense. This one goes to the aforementioned Intel i3 10100F and 10105F CPUs. Typically, we've given this to Pentium class or R3 CPUs, but options there are limited today. The Pentiums suck and they're way too expensive. They actually cost more than these, and the R3s in this price class have evaporated. The 10100F and 10105F are similar in price right now. We checked a few places. They seem to be at the lowest end at $70, the highest at $80. For specs, they're both 4-core and 8-thread CPUs, and from the days before P-core and E-core delineations, which is one type of core. Frequency is 100 megahertz faster on the 10105F, which is worth it if they're the same or similar in price. The F designation just means no integrated graphics processor, which helps bring the cost down, and you can spend that savings on a real GPU anyway. If you needed an IGP for gaming and you wanted to skip the dedicated GPU, going with a higher end CPU would make more sense in most cases, because the IGPs that integrate graphics on these 1010X processors is just bad. We recently revisited the Intel i3 10100F in our benchmarks, showing that the CPU, now $70-ish, is still usable if you're seriously constrained on cache. This will get you into something that's gameable at least. We don't think the CPU will last particularly long with more demanding games long term, but depending on your financial situation, it still might make more sense to just grab this now and work with it for a few years. Upgrade options will be limited because you'll probably want to buy a cheaper motherboard to go with this. Doesn't make sense to buy a really nice board for this, but there are plenty of used 10 series CPUs that could potentially offer a step up. For example, maybe in 2 years, you can still use this system, but you put an i5 in it from eBay or something. These CPUs being $70 to $75 is about as good as it gets, below $100 right now, while not sacrificing too much in the way of playability for games. The biggest disappointment is last. It's sort of like a best of award, except not for a good thing. We always have one of these to remind us of what else came out this year. And genuinely, we'd totally forgotten about the AMD R5 4500 until working on this video. The R5 4500 came out in April of 2022, and it actually, despite public opinion, wasn't an April Fool's joke. Our title for the video was, quote, AMD Speedruns Destruction of Goodwill. We had this to say about the R5 4500 in that video. So to catch you up on the 4500 and why it is an utter waste of your time and the world's resources, the water, for example, that was used for purifying the wafers that created the 4500 probably would have been better in just about anything else, like a toilet, for example. More useful there. Meaner than I remember, but I still think it's deserved for AMD here. The CPU launched at $130, which had it within $10 of the i3-12100F at the time, and insultingly expensive compared to the rest of AMD's lineup. This CPU could have made sense at $80. But at 130, without an IGP, it just wasn't anywhere close to where it needed to be. And it was an insult that we didn't expect from AMD. Okay, so here's the fresh news that I just got. We filmed the whole thing you just watched and then filmed this intro and outro for it, which we do that to allow for news changes like this. And what we just got is a little bit of news about the new prices for Ryzen 7000 for Black Friday specials. They should probably stay at these prices. If you haven't paid attention in the last few months, the biggest criticism against the 7000 series is that it was far too expensive to really be competitive, but it came out before Intel's 13000 series, so they were able to get away with it for a little while. So the prices for at least now, and hopefully they stay, bring the R7 7700X from $400 to $350, instantly more interesting. Brings the R9 7900X down to $474 from $550. That's a big drop, $75. The R9 7950X from $700 to $575, and then the R5 7600X from $300 to $250. And in this very video, we just talked about how the 7600X specifically was about $50 too high. So what does that mean? How does that impact things? Well, if these prices are still true when you are shopping and watching this video, here's what we want you to know. For the 7600X, if the 13600K is still at $300, we think that it changes the 7600X from being completely uninteresting as a comparison at that price point where you should basically only be buying the 13600K to bringing it back into the running where 13600K still has a lead in a lot of scenarios, not all of them, but it's enough to still consider it. It's just that the $50 becomes pretty appealing if you can maybe put that towards a GPU or something instead. Now, the biggest difference here with the 7600X specifically, its weakness is that the entry-level platform cost, so motherboard, specifically sort of RAM, but if you're doing DDR5, they both have that cost. Motherboard, though, Intel has a little bit of an advantage there where you get a cheaper board, so that one's kind of wishy-washy. We're not going to firmly commit to one there. They're both pretty good. The 13600K, we still kind of like at $300. As for the 7700X, we liked that one more than we've typically liked the R7s at launch pricing. So the fact that it's dropped $50 makes it compelling versus the 13700K. But we still think the 7600X is the weakest argument. The price drop helps, certainly, but it's still just, there's not really a lot in that budget tier right now. Unless you really drop hard, and it doesn't fully satisfy the need for something in that 200-ish range. So it's getting closer. That's the kind of commentary off the cuff of what just changed as we were setting up to film, and hopefully that helps. But our understanding is those prices won't be permanent. Probably they're going to end up being permanent in some capacity, maybe not quite as steep of a drop long term, but AMD is feeling pressure from Intel right now. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersaccess.net and use code THANKSSTEVE because thank you for supporting us for this past year and into next year, and hopefully we can keep using the Intel memes into the future. So subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.